The silence came without warning. It did not announce itself with visible symptoms or dramatic deaths. People simply stopped waking up. Parents tucked their children into bed, whispered goodnight, and never opened their eyes again. It swept through the outer fringe worlds like a whisper itself, invisible, unstoppable, utterly selective in its cruelty. In 3 months, 4.7 billion adults were dead across 12 species, and 100,000 children survived, orphaned and alone. The physicians who studied the plague afterward would never fully understand its mechanism. It targeted neural pathways unique to adult cognition, leaving juvenile minds untouched. Some theorized it was an evolutionary virus, others a weapon gone wrong. Still others suggested it was simply the universe's casual indifference made manifest. But the cause mattered less than the consequence. An entire generation of children waking to find every adult they had ever known lying cold and still. The galaxy's response was swift and organized. Emergency services evacuated the children to Orbital Station Refuge 7, a massive diplomatic facility that could, in theory, house the survivors until a solution presented itself. The station orbited a gas giant in neutral space, far from any single species territory, accessible to all and claimed by none. It was the perfect temporary shelter. Temporary became weeks, weeks became months, and no solution emerged. Ambassador Declan Rourke had been Earth's representative to the Galactic Assembly for 11 years, long enough to understand that the galaxy's greatest civilizations had perfected the art of sophisticated indifference. He had watched them debate trade sanctions while border wars raged. He had listened to 12-hour sessions on mineral rights while refugee ships burned in quarantine zones. He had learned that bureaucracy was the universe's most effective shield against moral responsibility. But he had never seen them look quite this uncomfortable. The assembly sphere hung in perfect orbit around the neutron star apex, an architectural marvel of transparent alloys and gravity manipulation that had taken the combined efforts of 17 species a century to construct. 43 species sent their representatives here to debate in a chamber where every delegate could see every other, where hiding was impossible and unanimous consent was tradition. The transparency was meant to encourage honesty. In practice, it encouraged conformity. Today, that transparency felt more like exposure. Declan sat in Earth's assigned station near the bottom of the sphere, a position that reflected humanity's status as the newest member of this ancient institution. 50 years of galactic citizenship barely registered against civilizations that measured their histories in millennia. He had learned to use that youth as camouflage, letting older species dismiss Earth as pleasantly naive while he observed and cataloged their patterns. Today, he would need every scrap of that accumulated understanding. Chancellor Vex Moradin of the Trexian sovereignty stood at the chamber's center, his scaled hands gesturing at holographic projections that hovered above the polished floor. The Trexians had perfected the art of appearing reasonable while proposing the unreasonable, and Moradin embodied that talent. His voice carried the weight of regret, professional and practiced, the kind that sounded sincere but cost nothing. "The medical facts are clear," Moradin said, his scaled fingers manipulating the display. "Orbital Station Refuge 7's life support systems are failing. We have, at maximum capacity, 6 months before catastrophic system collapse. The children currently housed there represent 12 distinct species, each with incompatible biological requirements." The projections shifted, showing the orphans. Declan forced himself to watch. He had reviewed this footage a dozen times in preparation, but seeing it again in the Assembly's clinical presentation made something twist in his chest. Lumineth children with their crystalline exoskeletons catching the light like living diamonds. Small Euthari huddled in groups, their rodent features tight with confusion. A Kethran child whose feathers had gone gray with trauma sitting motionless in a corner. 100,000 faces who did not understand why the adults had all stopped moving, why the world had become silent and strange. Moradin continued, his tone carefully calibrated to convey sympathetic pragmatism. "We have spent 2 weeks soliciting volunteers from member species. I want to be absolutely clear about this. We have exhausted every conventional option. No species has the capacity to adopt even a single complete cohort. The Lumineth require communication through light pulses, technology the Kethran worlds cannot provide. The Quellan need pressurized aquatic environments that would bankrupt 3 economies to construct in sufficient numbers. The Solvorans require temperatures of 800 degrees Celsius, temperatures that would kill most other species in proximity. He paused, letting the impossibility sink into the assembled delegates like water into stone. "We are not discussing abandonment," Moradin said, and Declan noted the careful phrasing, the way the Chancellor positioned himself on moral high ground. "We are discussing mercy. We are discussing the most humane path forward when all other paths have closed." Councillor Fila Sunweaver raised a wing. Her plumage shifted to distressed blue, the Kethran equivalent of barely controlled anguish. Sunweaver was young by assembly standards, only 3 decades in her position, and she had not yet learned to fully armor herself against emotional response. "There must be alternatives we have not considered. Collaborative housing arrangements, perhaps, or technology sharing agreements that could—" "We have considered everything," Administrator Quellix interrupted from within his pressurized tank, his aquatic form rippling with certainty. The Quellan were master bureaucrats, and Quellix had spent 200 years perfecting the art of making impossibility sound inevitable. Mathematical models show that distributing these children across multiple worlds would require infrastructure investments exceeding the gross domestic product of 17 member species. And even then, we cannot guarantee successful integration. Many of these children carry genetic markers from extinct cultural lines. They speak languages no adult knows anymore. They have psychological trauma that we are not equipped to address across such distributed systems. So we kill them? Sunweaver's colors flared red, a display of anger that made several nearby delegates flinch. "We who claim to be the civilized galaxy? We who pride ourselves on our advancement and ethics? We end their suffering," Moradin said softly, and Declan recognized the rhetorical technique. Lower the voice, slow the cadence, make horror sound like kindness, painlessly, humanely, before the life support fails and they experience the terror of slow asphyxiation, before starvation takes the ones with specialized diets we cannot provide, before they understand, truly understand, that they are burdens no one wants. A murmur of uncomfortable agreement rippled through the chamber. Declan observed the delegates' body language, the way they shifted in their stations, the small signs of relief that someone had finally said what they had all been thinking. This was how atrocity became policy, not through malice, but through the collective agreement that the alternative was too expensive, too complicated, too hard. He watched High Arbiter Thune, the ancient being who chaired these sessions. The Arbiter's species had no face, just a crystalline form that refracted light in patterns that conveyed meaning to those who knew how to read them. Right now, Thune's facets dimmed, the equivalent of closing one's eyes against something unbearable to witness. "The proposal before the Assembly," Moradin said, pulling up a new document that filled the air with formal text, "is Resolution 3847, compassionate cessation, full sedation followed by neural termination. Medical oversight will ensure they feel nothing, and we will honor their memory with monuments on each of their homeworlds, preserving the cultural legacy that will otherwise be lost." Monuments, Declan thought. How generous, how thoroughly useless to the dead. "The vote," Thune said quietly, their voice carrying the hollowness of anticipated defeat, "on Resolution 3847. The chamber filled with light as each delegate's station glowed with their decision. Declan did not need to count. He could see it in the uniform amber glow spreading across the sphere like a disease. Yes, yes, yes. 43 species, each with their own histories of overcoming extinction events, surviving catastrophes, building civilizations from the ruins of disaster. 43 species who had learned, somewhere along their various paths to starfaring status, that survival sometimes required hard choices. And 43 affirmations for the murder of children. 0 opposition. The silence in the chamber was worse than the plague that had started this cascade of tragedy. At least the silence had been natural, a quirk of biology or virology or cosmic chance. This was choice. This was civilization deciding that some lives were too inconvenient to save. "The resolution passes," Thune announced, and there was something like grief in the way their crystalline form fractured the light. Implementation will begin within 72 hours unless— Point of order! Declan's voice cut across the chamber like a blade. Every delegate turned. 43 species representatives swiveling to look at the human in the corner, the one who usually sat quietly and voted with the majority on everything except territorial disputes and trade agreements. Earth had learned to be agreeable, to avoid making waves, to build goodwill through pleasant irrelevance. Today, Declan was done being pleasant. Ambassador Rourke, Thune said, and their tone carried surprise, Earth's vote has already been recorded. I am not contesting the vote, Declan said, standing. His knees protested the movement. At 58, he was old by diplomatic standards, and the sphere's gravity was set to apex standard, 10% heavier than Earth normal. He had learned to hide the discomfort, but today his body made its complaints known. I am invoking Article 12 of the Assembly Charter. Chancellor Moradin's scales ruffled, a Trexian tell for sudden alarm. He knew exactly where this was going and was already formulating counter-arguments. Article 12 applies to humanitarian interventions in ongoing conflicts between member species, not internal humanitarian crises within. Not internal crises? Declan smiled without warmth, without anything except the cold fury he had been suppressing for 2 weeks. Funny. I do not see any limitations in the text, just the phrase, any member species may claim responsibility for rendered assistance in matters where sentient life hangs in immediate balance. 100,000 children on a failing station seems to qualify. You cannot possibly, Administrator Quelix began, his form roiling with bureaucratic outrage. We can, and we do. Declan pulled up his own holographic display, mirroring the Assembly's protocols. Earth formally invokes Article 12 and claims protective responsibility for all 100,000 orphans currently housed on Refuge 7. The chamber exploded into chaos. Voices overlapped in 17 languages, translators struggling to keep up with the sudden cacophony. Declan caught fragments through the linguistic storm. Absurd. No infrastructure, youngest species here, cannot even protect their own colonies properly. The objections came from a place of genuine disbelief. Earth was asking to do what the combined resources of 43 advanced civilizations had deemed impossible. Thune's form blazed with light, the equivalent of pounding a gavel. The chamber fell into shocked silence. Ambassador, the arbiter said carefully, choosing each word as though it might detonate. Perhaps you do not fully understand the scope of what you are proposing. These are not just children. These are 12 distinct biological paradigms, each requiring specialized environments, diets, medical care, educational approaches tailored to cognitive structures we barely understand. The logistical complexity alone— I read the report, Declan interrupted. All 3,000 pages, pressurized water tanks for the Quellen, energy matrices for the Praxis, geothermal sites for the Solvorans, collective consciousness architecture for the Zathene, tactile bonding protocols for the Nomathai, specialized atmospheres for the Prixian, thermal regulation for the Brekel, photosynthetic environments for the Thessian, herd structures for the Corventhi, rapid maturation support for the Euthari, color spectrum emotional supports for the Kethrin, and crystalline communication networks for the Lumineth. I understand exactly what is being asked. Then you understand it is impossible, Moradin said flatly. The Chancellor had recovered from his initial surprise and now regarded Declan with something approaching pity, the way one might look at someone about to attempt suicide by jumping off a cliff while insisting they could fly. For you, maybe, Declan said. For anyone. Ambassador, be rational. Earth has been part of this assembly for barely 50 years. Your species has not even properly colonized your own solar system. You are proposing to integrate biological complexity that has defeated civilizations 10,000 years older than yours. Civilizations with technologies you cannot hope to replicate, resources you do not possess, expertise you have not developed. This is not confidence. This is delusion. The other delegates murmured agreement. Several displayed the body language equivalents of sympathetic embarrassment, the way beings react when watching someone humiliate themselves publicly. Declan understood their perspective. From where they sat with millennia of institutional memory and technological advancement, Earth must look like a child insisting it could rebuild a star. But they were making a fundamental miscalculation about human nature. "You are correct," Declan said, and watched surprise ripple through the chamber. "About all of it. We lack your technology, we lack your expertise, we lack your resources and your institutional knowledge. You are absolutely right that what we are attempting should be impossible." "Then why?" Moradin started. "Because someone has to," Declan said simply. "And if it is going to be anyone, it might as well be the ones too young to know it is impossible." Counselor Sunweaver's plumage shifted to confused purple. "Ambassador Rourke, I do not understand. You acknowledge the impossibility, yet you persist?" Declan looked around the chamber, at the representatives of species that had built empires spanning hundreds of worlds, that had technologies Earth could not dream of replicating for another 1,000 years, that had cultural wisdom and philosophical frameworks refined across eons, and none of them had answered a distress call from dying children. "Counselor, may I ask you a question?" Declan said. Sunweaver's feathers rippled with uncertainty, but she nodded. "You have children, correct? I remember you mentioning them during the trade negotiations last year." "I have 3 offspring, yes. If they were in danger, if they needed help desperately, and you were told it was mathematically impossible to save them, economically unfeasible, logistically too complex, what would you do?" Sunweaver's colors shifted through confusion to understanding to something like shame. "I would try anyway." "Yes, you would. And that is what we are doing. The only difference is that these are not our children, but that does not make them any less worth saving." "This is not about sentiment," Administrator Quellick said, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining basic concepts to the willfully ignorant. "This is about realistic assessment of capabilities. Ambassador, your emotional response is understandable, but emotion is not infrastructure. It is not medical expertise. It is not the specialized technology required to keep these children alive. What happens when they die in your care because you lack the sophistication to maintain their biological requirements?" "Then we will fail honestly," Declan said. "But we are not going to let 100,000 children die because the math is hard." Moradin stepped forward, his scales settling into a pattern that conveyed grim determination. He needed this on record, needed the Assembly to witness Earth's commitment, so that when it failed, as he was certain it would, the responsibility would be entirely humanity's. "I want to be absolutely clear about what you are claiming, Ambassador. You are stating, for the official record, that Earth will take full responsibility for all 100,000 orphans currently housed on Refuge 7, provide for all their biological, educational, psychological, and cultural needs?" "Yes." "For how long?" "However long it takes." "That could be decades, generations." Moradin pulled up biological data. "The Corventhi children alone will not reach maturity for 37 years by your calendar. Are you committing Earth to nearly 4 decades of support for a single species cohort, to say nothing of the other 11? Then we will see them to 38 years. The Chancellor's laugh carried genuine bitterness, not mockery, but the sound of someone witnessing what they believed to be inevitable tragedy. "You do not have the resources, Ambassador. Earth's entire annual economic output would not cover the infrastructure requirements for the first year alone, let alone the sustained support required across decades. The Praxis energy matrices alone cost more than your planetary GDP. We will find the resources. How? By magic? By wishful thinking?" Declan met his eyes and said with quiet certainty, "Same way we have survived everything else. We will improvise, adapt, and refuse to quit until it is done. That might not be sophisticated, Chancellor, but it is honest work." High Arbiter Thune's form pulsed with what might have been respect or might have been resignation. "The Assembly would need guarantees, Ambassador, proof of capability before we could in good conscience release these children to your care. Resource allocation plans, infrastructure timelines, medical protocols verified by—" 30 days, Declan said. The chamber went silent. "I beg your pardon?" Thune said. "Give us 30 days to mobilize. We will demonstrate proof of concept. If we cannot show viable pathways for all 12 species within 1 month, We will defer to the Assembly's judgment." He had almost said, "Surrender them," but the words had caught in his throat like broken glass, because surrendering them meant signing their death warrants, and Declan was not yet ready to speak that possibility into existence. Moradin looked triumphant now, certain he had just witnessed Earth commit to spectacular public failure. 30 days to accomplish what the combined resources of 43 species could not manage in 2 weeks of intensive deliberation? This should be educational. The Assembly will learn exactly why emotional responses make poor policy. "Then we have an accord?" Thune asked. "We do," Declan confirmed. "Vrai. Very well. Earth is granted 30 days from this moment to demonstrate viability of their proposed guardianship. If proof of concept cannot be established across all 12 species requirements, Resolution 3847 will proceed as passed. This session is adjourned." As the chamber began to empty, delegates filing out with expressions ranging from pity to schadenfreude, Councillor Sunweaver glided past Declan's station. Her plumage flickered to hopeful gold, a color he had rarely seen in the Assembly's normally reserved proceedings. "I pray you succeed, Ambassador," she said softly. "So do I," Declan admitted, because he had just committed his entire species to the impossible, and the certainty he had projected in the chamber was already crumbling into doubt. He genuinely had no idea if humanity could actually accomplish what he had just promised, but he knew with absolute clarity that they had to try. The message reached Earth 7 hours later, traveling through the quantum communication network that linked all Assembly members. Minister Ekene Adeyemi of Interspecies Affairs received it in his Lagos office at 3:27 in the morning local time. He read it twice, then a third time, then pulled up Declan's face on the secure channel. "Please tell me I'm having a stroke and hallucinating this conversation," Ekene said. "No stroke," Declan confirmed from his quarters on the sphere. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the Assembly session having worn off to reveal the bone-deep fatigue underneath. "We have 29 days and 17 hours to prepare for the largest humanitarian operation in human history." "Declan, we cannot. Do you understand what you have committed us to?" Aken was not prone to panic, but his voice climbed half an octave as he pulled up the preliminary reports. "I understand." "Do you? Really?" Aken spread holographic data across his office. "The Sulvorans need 800-degree environments. We would have to build facilities at geothermal sites that can sustain that temperature safely for decades. The Quellon need pressure tanks that make nuclear submarines look like bath toys. The Praxis are semi-corporeal energy beings that could destabilize into explosions if their containment fails. We are talking about technology we have not even invented yet, systems we have barely theorized about in academic papers. So we invent it. In 30 days? Declan, our fastest emergency response infrastructure project, the Singapore seawall expansion, took 6 months, and that was just concrete and steel. You are asking for exotic physics, xenobiological life support, and cultural integration frameworks for 12 completely alien species. 29 days and 16 hours now, Declan corrected. Aken rubbed his eyes. He had worked with Declan for 8 years and knew the man well enough to recognize when determination had crossed into something resembling madness. "You have lost your mind." "Probably. But the vote already happened. Either we try or—" Declan pulled up an image that had been haunting him since the Assembly session. A Euthari child, no bigger than a human toddler, looking at the camera with enormous dark eyes that held more trust than any being in that situation should possess. "Or we let them die." There was a long silence. Aken stared at the image, at the small creature that had no idea it was scheduled for execution, that was waiting in a failing orbital station for adults to save it. Adults who had voted for its death. "God help us," Aken said finally. His voice had changed, shifted from objection to grim acceptance. "I will convene the Integration Authority within the hour. But Declan, if we fail, we will not. If we fail, you understand what it will cost? Not just politically, not just diplomatically, morally. We will have given them hope, shown them rescue was possible, and then—" "I know," Declan said quietly. "That is why we cannot fail." Aken nodded slowly. The weight of what they were attempting settled over him like a physical thing. I will make the calls, start assembling the teams. But you need to understand something, my friend. If we do this, if we actually pull this off, we will have changed what it means to be part of the galactic community. We will have shown that the impossible is just another word for hard, and they will never forgive us for it. I can live with that, Declan said. Can you live with failure? No, which is why it is not an option. Dr. Amara Osei arrived at Orbital Station Refuge 762 hours after Earth's commitment, leading a medical team of 47 specialists pulled from 12 different countries and 6 different medical disciplines. The station smelled like fear and failing recyclers, a combination that hit her the moment the airlock cycled open. She had spent the journey reviewing files, memorizing biological requirements, studying the limited xenobiological literature available. But nothing had prepared her for the reality of what neglect looked like on this scale. Dr. Osei? A harried Kethran medic met her at the entrance, plumage cycling through stressed patterns of gray and brown. I am Healer Minara. I have to warn you, the children are deteriorating faster than projected. The Praxis cohort especially. 3 destabilized last night. Amara felt her stomach drop. The Praxis were semi-corporeal beings of pure energy, held in coherent form by quantum state biological processes that human science barely understood. Destabilization meant they began to unravel into incoherent energy releases. Are they stable now? We contained the energy releases, but barely. The containment bottles are designed for industrial plasma storage, not sentient beings. And the Namathi children, Minara's feathers drooped in the Kethran expression of helpless grief. They are catatonic. We think the telepathic isolation from losing all adult minds in their network has caused a kind of psychological shutdown. We have tried everything we know, but we are not telepaths ourselves. We cannot reach them. Amara had read the reports, had reviewed the medical data during the 72-hour journey. Reading statistics and seeing the reality were 2 entirely different categories of experience. The main habitation ring was controlled chaos at best, actual chaos at worst. 12 different species, 12 different sets of biological requirements, and nowhere near enough resources or trained staff to properly address any of them. Solveran children huddled in modified heat chambers that were running at 600 degrees instead of the 800 they needed for comfort. Quellan young floated in tanks too small for their developing physiology, their gills working overtime in water that was improperly pressurized. The Zathene, crystalline beings who existed as a collective consciousness, had been split into individual shards and placed in separation cells because no one understood how to house a hive mind, and the result was fragments of consciousness slowly going insane from isolation. "Show me everything," Amara said, and she heard her own voice take on the tone it always did in emergency situations. Calm, professional, detached. She would process the horror later. Right now, she needed to document. The next 8 hours blurred together. Medical scans, environmental readings, careful interactions with children who flinched from adult contact because adults had become associated with death and abandonment. Amara's team moved through the station with obsessive precision, cataloging every requirement, every complication, every potential point of failure, and there were so many points of failure, so many ways this could go catastrophically wrong. By hour 9, Amara had filled 17 data pads with notes and was on her 3rd stimulant patch to fight the exhaustion. She opened a secure channel to Director Jian Zhang at the Brussels Harmonization Facility. Jian answered immediately, his face haggard on the screen. He had been coordinating with 12 different national governments, 400 NGOs, and approximately 800,000 volunteers in the 72 hours since Declan's announcement. His office looked like a war room, holographic displays covering every surface with logistics data. "How bad?" he asked without preamble. "The good news," Amara said, "is that the children are remarkably resilient. The bad news is we are looking at resource requirements 3 times our initial estimates." Jian closed his eyes briefly. "How bad?" "The Quellan tanks alone will cost $47 billion to construct in sufficient numbers. The Praxis containment matrices require technology we will need to adapt from particle accelerators, which means coordinating with CERN and Fermilab and every other high-energy physics facility on Earth. The Salvoran facilities, Gian. We are talking about building sustainable 800-degree environments that can house children safely for decades. The geothermal sites in Iceland and New Zealand are possibilities, but the construction timeline is 18 days, Gian interrupted. That is what the engineers gave me. 18 days to have the first facilities operational, or we cannot make the 30-day deadline for assembly review. That is impossible. Apparently, we are in the business of the impossible now. John rubbed his temples hard enough to leave red marks. I have good news, though. Foster family applications hit 892,000 this morning. We are not lacking for volunteers. People want to help. 892,000 families willing to take in alien children. Amara felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of tension she had been carrying since first reading about the Assembly's vote. Humans could be terrible, could be cruel and short-sighted and selfish. But they could also be this, hundreds of thousands of strangers willing to open their homes to beings they had never met. That is incredible, she said. It is humanity. We are idiots who mean well. John smiled tiredly. How soon can you give me a breakdown by species? Foster families need to know what they are signing up for. We cannot just say alien child and hope for the best. 48 hours, but Gian, some of these children, the trauma level is severe. We are going to need massive psychological support structures, the nomathai especially. They have lost their entire telepathic network. Imagine losing the ability to communicate at all, being trapped in absolute silence. That is what they are experiencing. Already on it. We have been pulling child psychologists out of retirement and running emergency xenopsych training protocols. It is chaos, but it is organized chaos, mostly. Amara looked at her data pads, covered in notes and calculations and desperate improvised ideas. We are really doing this. We are. Try to get some sleep, Amara. You look like hell. You should see the other guy. After the call ended, Amara walked through the habitation ring one more time. Most of the children were sleeping now, or what passed for sleep in their various biologies. The Lumineth lay in clusters, their crystalline bodies pulsing with dim bioluminescence that created moving shadows on the walls. The Kethrin roosted in modified nests, feathers tucked tight against their bodies. The Breckle had curled into their nocturnal sleep positions, their reptilian forms perfectly still. She found one child still awake, a Euthari, small and rodent-like, watching her from behind a partition with eyes that reflected the dim station lighting. Its whiskers twitched nervously. Amara knelt slowly, making herself smaller, less threatening. "Hello," she said softly. "My name is Amara. I'm here to help." The child tilted its head with quick bird-like movements. The translators on this station were minimal, not sophisticated enough for children's language patterns yet. Communication was rough at best. "Help?" it squeaked. The word was heavily accented but recognizable through the translator algorithm. "Yes, we are taking you somewhere safe. Away from this place." "Safe?" The Euthari's dark eyes were enormous in its small face. "Nowhere safe. Everyone gone." Amara felt her throat tighten. She had reviewed the psychological profiles, understood intellectually that these children had watched every adult they knew die without warning, but hearing it stated so plainly by this small creature made the enormity of their trauma real in a way statistics could not. "Not everyone," she said firmly. "There are people who want to take care of you. On my world, it is called Earth." "Earth?" The child tested the word, its translator struggling with the unfamiliar phoneme. "Is Earth far from dying?" The question hit like a physical blow. Of course they associated any new place with the possibility of death. Their entire world had taught them that safety was an illusion. "Yes," Amara said. "Very far from dying. Safe. I promise." The Euthari considered this with the seriousness of someone far older than its physical age suggested. "Will you kill us there? I heard adults talking. They said killing was mercy." Amara felt rage and grief war in her chest. The fact that these children had overheard the Assembly's deliberations, had understood they were scheduled for execution disguised as compassion, made everything infinitely worse. "No," she said, and she poured every ounce of conviction she possessed into that single word. "Never. We are going to keep you safe, all of you, for as long as you need." "Promise?" "I promise." The Euthari studied her for a long moment with eyes that had already learned not to trust easily. Then it nodded slowly, a human gesture it had probably picked up from station staff. Okay. I tell others. I tell them humans make promises. It scampered away before Amara could respond, disappearing into the warren of partitions and makeshift shelters. She stayed kneeling there in a failing orbital station, surrounded by children no one else wanted, and wondered if she had just made a promise that humanity could actually keep, or if she had just lied to a traumatized child who had already lost everything. Day 14 brought their first major crisis, and it came at 3 a.m. station time when Amara was deepest in exhausted sleep. The alarms cut through her dreams like blades. She was running before she was fully conscious, her training overriding the fog of too little rest. The Praxis child, designated as Subject 847, was destabilizing, its energy signature spiking erratically across every sensor in its containment section. Amara arrived to find the child, a barely corporeal being of pure energy, pulsing wildly inside a magnetic containment bottle that had been designed for industrial plasma storage, not sentient life that could think and feel and panic. Readings are spiking across all frequencies, the night technician said, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. He was new, green, and way out of his depth. If that bottle fails... It will not, Amara said with more confidence than she felt. She pulled up the sensor data, her mind racing through the medical literature she had reviewed, trying to find anything useful. The child was not dying, not exactly. It was having the equivalent of a panic attack, its energy signature cycling through frequencies that the static containment could not adapt to fast enough. She grabbed a communication tablet. I need everyone out of this section except essential personnel, and get me an engineer, someone who understands magnetic field dynamics, now. The engineer who arrived was Casper Anderson, recently assigned from Earth's Emergency Response Division. He was young, barely 30, with the kind of nervous energy that either meant brilliance or disaster. He took one look at the destabilizing praxis and swore in Danish, a long creative string of profanity that needed no translation. Can we stabilize it? Amara demanded. Casper pulled up the frequency readings, his fingers moving with practiced speed across the holographic interface. Not with this setup. Look, the bottle is designed for static containment, but the child, it is cycling, trying to communicate or regulate or something biological we do not understand. Every time it pulses, the containment fights to maintain equilibrium. We are not containing it. We are suffocating it. So what do we do? Casper stared at the data, then at the terrified energy being inside its prison. Amara could see him calculating, weighing risks against possibilities. We let it breathe. If we drop the containment, we do not drop it. We modulate it, turn the bottle from a cage into something that moves with the child instead of against it. His fingers flew across the control panel, pulling up containment protocols. I can reprogram the magnetic field to be responsive instead of static, adaptive to the frequency changes. But Dr. Osei, I have never tried this. If I am wrong, if the field destabilizes, if you are wrong, the child dies anyway when the current setup fails completely. Amara looked at the pulsing entity, at the raw panic in its energy signature. She had promised them safety. Do it. Casper's hands shook slightly as he reconfigured the containment protocols. Lines of code rewrote themselves in the holographic display, turning static mathematics into dynamic response algorithms. The bottle's characteristic shimmer changed, becoming less rigid, more fluid. The praxis child pulsed, and for the first time, the containment pulsed back, matching its rhythm instead of fighting it. The erratic spiking smoothed into coherent waves. The child stabilized. Casper sagged against the control panel, his face pale with released tension. Holy hell, it actually worked. It should not have, but it worked. Can we replicate this for the other praxis? We have 18 more who will need this. I think so. The algorithm is actually elegant once you understand the principle. Instead of fighting their nature, we dance with it. It is like having a conversation instead of shouting orders. Casper was already documenting everything, his engineering mind cataloging the process for replication. This will need to be built into the facilities on Earth. The containment has to be smart, adaptive, alive in its own way. Amara documented everything with obsessive precision. This improvised solution would need to be reproduced for every praxis child, then scaled up for permanent facilities. It would need to work not just in the crisis of this moment, but for decades to come. As Casper left to brief the engineering teams back on Earth, Amara stayed and watched the child, now peaceful in its adaptive containment. It pulsed once, twice, in a pattern that might have been random or might have been intentional communication. She tapped the observation window gently. "You are okay now. I promise." The entity pulsed again, and Amara chose to believe that was trust beginning to form. The assembly observers arrived on day 21, and their timing was clearly calculated. They came early enough to catch systems still strained, protocols still being refined, cracks still visible in humanity's improvised response. Chancellor Moradin led the inspection team himself, accompanied by representatives from 6 species who had voted for euthanization and now wanted to document their vindication. Moradin toured Refuge 7 with the air of someone conducting an autopsy on a still-living patient. His scaled face maintained professional neutrality, but Amara could read the satisfaction in his posture. He was looking for failure, anticipated it, welcomed it. "Impressive improvisation," Moradin admitted while examining the modified praxis containment. "Though I notice you have had to adapt technology in ways that were not exactly tested by conventional standards. This adaptive field approach, for instance. How many trials did you run before implementing it on living subjects?" "None," Casper said bluntly. "We tested the mathematics, verified the field dynamics, and implemented immediately because the child was dying." "So you are conducting experimental procedures on vulnerable sentient beings without proper testing protocols?" "We are saving lives using the resources available to us," Amara corrected. "Would you prefer we followed proper procedures while they died?" Moradin's scales shifted to skeptical amber. "That is a false dichotomy, Doctor. Proper procedure exists to prevent catastrophic failures. Your improvisation might work today, but what happens next month when something you did not anticipate causes a containment breach? What happens when one of these adaptive fields destabilizes and the resulting energy release kills humans and orphans alike? Then we will learn from that failure and improve our protocols." "That is not scientific method, Doctor. That is gambling with lives." "No, it is emergency medicine. Different protocols, same goal. Keep the patient alive long enough to transition to sustainable care." They moved through the habitation ring, Moradin's team taking extensive notes. The Quelon tanks, reinforced with technology adapted from submarine manufacturers. The Solvoran heat chambers, each one a miniature geothermal plant. The Nomathi trauma therapy program, where human volunteers provided what the psychologists called tactile anchoring for children who had lost their telepathic network. That last one made Moradin pause for a long time. "You are using untrained civilians as psychological support for severely traumatized telepathic beings?" "We are using humans with high empathy scores who have undergone intensive training in xenopsychological support protocols," Amara corrected. "The Nomathi responded to physical presence in ways that surprised us. They cannot read our minds, but they seem to find the solidity of human contact stabilizing." "Seem to find," Moradin repeated, seizing on the uncertainty. "You are conducting experimental psychology on vulnerable children based on seeming, on hunches. We are trying to keep them alive until we understand them better. The alternative was leaving them catatonic. Would you prefer that?" The Chancellor had no answer, but his silence felt more like tactical retreat than actual concession. The tour concluded at the Euthanize section, where the shattered collective consciousness was housed. This had been the hardest challenge from an engineering perspective. How do you house a hive mind that has been fragmented into individuals? "This is impossible," one of the observers said flatly, staring at the architectural nightmare of interconnected chambers with quantum resonance fields. Euthanize consciousness requires quantum entanglement across their crystalline network structure. Separated like this, they should have degraded into non-sentience within days. "They were degrading," Casper said. He had joined them for this section, still running on stimulants and determination. "Until we figured out that proximity helps, they cannot merge completely until they mature, but keeping them close enough for quantum resonance seems to allow partial collective function." Seems, Moradin noted. That word again. We are learning as we go, Chancellor. That is the entire point of this exercise. Moradin studied the Zathine chambers for a long moment, then turned to face Amara directly. Dr. Osei, I will be completely honest with you. What you have accomplished here in 21 days is remarkable, truly. Against all reasonable expectation, you have managed to keep 100,000 children of 12 different species alive in circumstances that should have resulted in massive casualties. But remarkable is not the same as sustainable. You have built systems that require constant monitoring, constant adjustment, constant human intervention. What happens when your staff burns out? When your volunteers go home? When the novelty wears off and Earth realizes it is committed to decades of this level of intensive care? Amara had been expecting this question since the moment the observers arrived. Then we will still be here, because these children do not get to decide when they stop needing us. Noble sentiment. History suggests otherwise. Every species that has attempted large-scale refugee integration has hit the point where political will fails, where compassion fatigue sets in, where the cost becomes unacceptable. Earth is no different from any other civilization in this regard. Then history has not dealt with humans before. Moradin actually laughed at that, a bitter sound. Doctor, I have been watching humans for 50 years. You are generous and creative and admirably stubborn. But you are still biological organisms subject to the same resource constraints, the same psychological limitations, the same basic economic realities as every other species. You cannot wish away physics or biology or political reality, no matter how noble your intentions. No, Amara agreed. We cannot wish them away. We have to work around them, through them, despite them. That is what we are doing. For now. Check back with me in 5 years, 10, 20. See if you still feel this committed when the true cost becomes clear. Day 28 brought the second crisis, and this one was worse because it should have been preventable. The Quelon tank system in Section 7 failed catastrophically at 2 in the afternoon station time. Pressure seals ruptured without warning, dumping 3,000 gallons of specialized saline solution into the corridor and leaving 17 Quelon children gasping in atmosphere their gills could not process. Amara ran faster than she had moved in 20 years, her heart hammering against her ribs. By the time she reached Section 7, the emergency teams were already there, already failing. Bulky emergency pressure suits designed for adult Quelon did not fit the children's smaller forms. The mobile containment tanks were still 5 minutes away, being wheeled through corridors never designed for emergency medical evacuations. The children were drowning in air. Casper was on the ground, soaked in saline, frantically trying to rig a makeshift breathing apparatus from oxygen tanks and plastic sheeting. His hands moved with desperate speed, but the physics were not cooperating. "It is not working," he said, and Amara heard panic creeping into his voice. "The pressure is too low. They cannot extract oxygen from atmosphere. We need water pressure at their gill depth or they are going to—" "The submarines," Amara said suddenly, the connection firing in her brain. "The equipment you adapted the main tanks from. Do any of the manufacturers have emergency rescue systems?" Casper's eyes went wide. "Deep-sea rescue equipment, high-pressure bubble chambers for rapid decompression emergencies. But Dr. Osei, the nearest facility is Brussels. Call Director Zhang. Tell him we need deep-sea rescue pods here in 30 minutes, or we lose these children. 30 minutes is physically impossible with our current transport. Then someone had better break some physics laws. Call him now." The next 30 minutes were the longest of Amara's life. The emergency teams did everything they could with the resources available, manually pumping pressurized water over the children's gills. But it was stopgap at best. The Quelon were evolved for pressures that human equipment could not easily replicate. Their biology demanded crushing force that industrial safety protocols forbid. Amara watched chronometer displays tick forward with agonizing slowness. The children's gill movements were slowing, their bodies shutting down from oxygen starvation. At minute 27, Casper shouted across the chaos, "They are here! The shuttle is here!" The military transport had violated every safety regulation in getting from Earth to Refuge 7 at speeds that should have torn its hull apart. It carried 12 deep-sea rescue pods, spherical chambers that could maintain crushing pressure in miniature. Technology designed to save human divers from the deepest ocean trenches, now repurposed to save alien children from asphyxiation. Loading the Quelon took 8 minutes of careful, desperate work. Every second counted, every movement had to be precise. Amara's hands shook as she sealed the last pod, watching through the transparent alloy as the child inside stopped its panicked thrashing and began breathing normally, its gills working smoothly in proper pressure again. 17 children, 17 pods, 17 for 17, no losses. But it had been far, far too close. That night, Amara found Declan Rourke in the station's communication center. He sat surrounded by holographic reports from Earth, his face haggard in the harsh lighting. At 58, he looked 70. "The Assembly is going to use this," Amara said quietly, entering without announcement. "Moradin will argue it proves we cannot handle the complexity." "Probably." Declan looked ancient in that moment, worn down by the weight of what he'd committed Earth to attempting. "How are the children?" "Stable. Traumatized from the experience, but stable. Casper thinks he can redesign the tank systems to have triple redundant pressure maintenance. But Declan, the Chancellor, is right about one thing. We are improvising constantly. We are always one system failure away from tragedy. Is this level of risk acceptable? Is the alternative acceptable?" Declan turned to face her, and his eyes held something that might have been desperation or might have been absolute conviction. "Amara, I did not make this call lightly. I spent 2 weeks analyzing every option before the Assembly vote, but I made the call. And now we are committed. Not because it is easy or safe or even fully possible, but because the alternative was scheduled mass execution. And if we fail anyway? If all our improvisation and desperation still fails and children die in our care? Then they die trying to live instead of being put down like inconvenient animals." His voice was rough with exhaustion and something deeper. "I know that is not comforting. I know the moral calculus is ugly. But it is the only calculus I can live with. I will not be part of a civilization that decides some lives are not worth the trouble of saving." Amara thought about the Quelon child she had sealed into the rescue pod, watching it gasp for breath, watching it live. Thought about the promise she had made to the Euthari days ago. "We will keep you safe." 2 more days, she said. "Then we have to convince the Assembly we can actually sustain this." "Can we?" "Ask me in 2 days." Day 30 arrived with the kind of inevitability that made Amara think of executions and final exams and medical board reviews. The Assembly reconvened with Earth's observation stations packed. Every major news network in human space was broadcasting live. 800,000 volunteer families watched from Earth, waiting to see if their training and preparation would be needed or if the Assembly would vote to reclaim the children for euthanization. Declan Rourke stood in the center of the Assembly sphere, surrounded by holographic projections of data from Refuge 7. 30 days of improvisation and desperation and near disasters, all reduced to graphs and metrics and statistical analyses. Chancellor Moradin opened the proceedings with clinical precision. "The inspection reports are mixed at best. Earth has demonstrated remarkable adaptability and creative problem-solving in crisis situations. However, they have also experienced multiple critical failures requiring emergency intervention. The Praxis destabilization on day 14, the Quelon tank rupture on day 28, 137 lesser incidents cataloged across the 30-day observation period. This is not stability, Ambassador Rourke. This is controlled chaos at best, dangerous negligence at worst." "Correct," Declan said, surprising the chamber. "It is all of those things." Moradin blinked. "You are agreeing with my assessment?" "Of course. We have been improvising constantly. We have had near disasters. Our systems are held together with adaptations and hope and exhausted engineers." Declan pulled up new projections, letting the data speak. "But here's what else is true. 0 deaths in 30 days, 100,000 children all alive, and according to Dr. Ossi's medical reports, showing measurable health improvements across all 12 species." The projections shifted to biometric data. Growth curves trending upward, trauma markers declining. Even the catatonic Nomathi children showing neural activity improvement through the tactile anchoring protocols. "We have trained 892,000 foster families," Declan continued. built 47 specialized facilities across 6 continents, established supply chains for 12 different biological paradigms, created the first multi-species pediatric medical database in galactic history, developed adaptive containment technology that could revolutionize energy storage, advanced our understanding of collective consciousness and telepathic cognition by decades of research time. By cutting corners and taking risks that any responsible civilization would reject, Morid countered. Yes, Declan's voice was quiet but absolute, because responsible civilizations voted to kill them instead. The silence in the chamber was total and damning. You want to talk about sustainable systems? Declan pulled up economic projections developed by Earth's best analysts. Our models show the initial investment paying economic dividends within 5 years. The Praxis adaptive containment alone has applications for energy production that could revolutionize power distribution. The Quelon tank systems are advancing our understanding of pressure dynamics in marine biology. We are not bearing a burden, Chancellor. We are investing in our future. Very pretty numbers, Administrator Quelix interjected from his pressurized tank. But numbers are not children. Statistics are not screaming infants terrified of their new environment. What happens when your first child dies despite all your efforts? When your populations see the real cost measured in tragedy rather than statistics? When the political support inevitably crumbles under the weight of sustained effort? Declan looked directly at the administrator. Then we mourn, and we keep going, because that is what you do when you are responsible for people. You do not give up when it gets hard. You do not calculate whether they are worth the effort. You just do the work. Counselor Sunweaver raised a wing, her plumage thoughtful blue. Ambassador Rourke, I believe your intentions are genuine, but the Chancellor raises valid concerns about long-term sustainability. How can you guarantee continued support across decades? Political climates change, economic situations shift, human attention moves to new crises. How can you promise these children will not be abandoned when the initial enthusiasm fades? I cannot, Declan said, and the honesty of it rippled through the chamber. I cannot guarantee there will not be political challenges. I cannot promise perfect execution. I cannot swear we will never have tragedies or failures or moments where we question everything we are doing. What I can guarantee is that we will be there, every day, trying our best, learning from our mistakes, improving our systems, and never, ever giving up on them. He pulled up one final projection, and Tamara recognized it immediately. The small Euthari child who had spoken to her on that first desperate day. The child looked healthier now, its fur glossier, its eyes brighter. It had learned more human language and had recorded a message specifically for this assembly session. The child's voice played through the translation system, high and clear. Adults voted to kill us because we were too hard to save. Humans said no. Humans make promises and keep them. You should be like humans. The message hit the assembly chamber with the force of moral indictment delivered by innocent lips. High Arbiter. Thune's crystalline form pulsed with the light of difficult decision. The assembly must vote. The question before us: does Earth retain custody of the 100,000 orphans, or do we proceed with Resolution 3847 as originally passed? The voting lights began to illuminate across the sphere. Declan watched the colors spread: green for Earth's continued custody, red for proceeding with euthanization. The voting was agonizingly close, each light that appeared potentially decisive. Amara watched from her observation post on Refuge 7, surrounded by her medical team. They had done everything possible. Now it came down to whether 43 ancient civilizations could remember what compassion looked like. The final tally appeared. Green, 22. Red, 21. Earth had won by a single vote. In the assembly chamber, there was no celebration, just exhausted relief. Chancellor Moridin stood slowly, his scales shifting through colors that suggested resignation more than defeat. This is a mistake, he said formally, but the assembly has spoken. His gaze locked onto Declan with uncomfortable intensity. I hope, Ambassador, that you are correct about human persistence, because the first time one of those children dies in your care, this entire project will be questioned. The first time your systems fail catastrophically and lives are lost, there will be calls to reverse this decision. Then we had better make sure our systems do not fail catastrophically, Declan said. And when they do? Because they will, Ambassador. That is not cynicism. That is statistical certainty. Nothing is perfect. Everyone fails eventually. What then? Declan smiled, tired but unshakable. Then we will bear it anyway, because that is what family does. You carry the weight even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. The Unity convoy launched from Earth 6 days later, and the images would be studied by historians for generations. 847 ships ranging from military transports to converted cargo haulers to luxury cruise vessels volunteered by their corporations. The largest civilian fleet in human history, all converging on one failing orbital station to collect 100,000 children that the galaxy had voted to kill. Amara Osei watched from Refuge 7 as the first ships appeared on sensors and felt something crack in her chest that had been holding tight for 36 days. They had actually done it. Earth had mobilized an entire planet's resources for beings they had never met. The boarding process took 4 days of careful, methodical work. 4 days of children meeting crews who had come to save them. 4 days of improvised solutions to problems nobody had anticipated. 4 days of terror slowly transforming into cautious hope. Lythan, a Lumineth child who had become an unofficial leader among the crystalline species through sheer force of personality, was among the first to board the UNSS Unity's Promise. The human crew member assigned to greet her was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a geologist who had spent the last month learning to communicate through light pulses. Yuki knelt to meet Lythan at eye level, her joints protesting the movement. She held up a small device that flickered with basic Lumineth greeting patterns, her hands shaking with nervousness. Lythan's crystalline body brightened suddenly, surprise and joy cascading through her structure in visible waves. Her light pulses came rapid and excited, too fast for the translator to keep up. She is asking if you are her new mother, a technician provided, reading the pattern manually. Yuki's eyes filled with tears that she made no attempt to hide. If you will have me, yes, if you want that. Lythan pulsed once, bright and clear. The translator rendered it simply as, safe? Yes, Yuki promised, reaching out a hand slowly. Safe. I promise you are safe now. The child extended a crystalline limb and touched Yuki's palm with infinite gentleness, as though afraid the human might shatter. Across the station, similar scenes played out 100,000 times, each one a small miracle of connection across impossible difference. The Kethrin child, whose feathers had been trauma gray for months, seeing real sky projected in the transport bay and suddenly flaring every color of joy the human crew had never seen before. The Quelon children, discovering that the specially designed tanks had transparent sections that let them see stars for the first time in their young lives. The Zathine shards, carefully loaded together into quantum-shielded chambers that would keep them connected during the journey, their collective consciousness already beginning to heal. The Namathi children, still struggling with their telepathic isolation, finding themselves surrounded by human volunteers who did not need words to offer comfort, just presence and touch, and the solid reality of someone who would not disappear. Casper Anderson found Amara on day 3 of the loading process. She was watching a group of Thessian children basking under full-spectrum UV lights, their chlorophyll-based skin already greening from the exposure. "We are going to make it," Casper said. "Did you doubt?" "Every single second since this insane project started." He smiled, exhausted. "But I stopped saying it out loud because that felt like bad luck." The last child to board was a tiny Euthari, the same one who had asked Amara about promises on that first desperate day. The child spotted her in the crowd of crew and volunteers and ran over, chittering excitedly. You came like you said you would." Amara knelt, feeling the full accumulated weight of 36 days of fear and hope and desperate improvisation settle onto her shoulders. "I told you. We keep our promises." "I know. I told everyone. I said humans are safe." The Euthari's whiskers twitched with satisfaction. "They did not believe me at first, but I was right." "What is your name?" Amara asked, realizing she had never learned it during the chaos. "Do not have one yet. Adults give names at maturity ceremony. All the adults are gone. Would you like a name now? A human name until you are old enough for your own ceremony? The Euthari considered this with the seriousness of someone contemplating a life-defining choice. What is a good name for me? Amara thought about this tiny being who had trusted her when it had every reason not to, who had taken her promise and spread it to others, who had chosen hope over despair. How about Speaks? Because you speak for those who cannot. You spoke for all the children when you trusted us first. Speaks. The creature tested it, the translator rendering the name in the Euthari language and back again. I like Speaks. That is who I am. I am Speaks. Well, Speaks, are you ready to go home? Home is gone. Home died with the adults. Amara felt her throat close. Then we will make a new one, together, on Earth. Speaks chittered something that the translator struggled with before rendering his thoughtful consideration. Okay, we make new home. Humans make good homes. I believe you. The convoy's journey to Earth took 17 days, and those days became a crash course in caring for children whose biology humanity barely understood. There were mistakes, near disasters, moments of panic when systems failed or cultural misunderstandings threatened to become medical emergencies. But there were also breakthroughs that nobody had anticipated. The Praxis children, freed from static containment and given adaptive fields that responded to their energy patterns, began displaying complex, organized behavior. The exobiologists realized the patterns were artistic expression, the first evidence that Praxis species had aesthetic concepts beyond pure survival function. The children were creating beauty with their energy forms, making art from the quantum states of their existence. The Nomathai children, bonded to their human tactile companions, started regaining cognitive function at rates that shocked the xenopsychologists. Whatever was healing them was not telepathy, but it was something profound. Connection, presence, the knowledge that someone would be there, solid and real, whenever they reached out. The Zathine shards kept in resonance range began merging thoughts in small, tentative ways. They were learning to be a collective again, but a different kind of collective than before. One shaped by individual experience during their separation, incorporating perspectives that had never existed in Zathine consciousness before. And the other species found their own small joys, Sulverans delighting in the warmth of thermal generators, Quellin racing through their tanks, playing games that human observers recognized as similar to Earth dolphin behavior. Breckle children fascinated by human night vision technology, Prixian children amazed by birds, creatures so like them but evolved in such different environments. Corventhi forming herds that included curious human crew members, Thessians sunbathing under artificial stars, Catherine learning to fly in low-gravity sections, their feathers finally displaying colors beyond trauma gray. All of them beginning to understand that this was real. They were going somewhere safe. On day 14 of the journey, Declan Rourke received a transmission from Chancellor Moradin. The request came through formal channels, which made it official record. Moradin wanted this conversation documented. "Ambassador," the Chancellor said when the connection established, "I wanted to inform you that the Assembly has been monitoring your convoy's progress with great interest." "I am sure you have," Declan said neutrally. "There have been incidents. The Praxis child who destabilized in Sector 4 of Ship 93, the Nomathi child who stopped breathing for 40 seconds, the Sulvoran heat system that failed in Ship 637. All resolved with 0 casualties," Declan countered. "This time." Moradin paused meaningfully. "I am not transmitting to gloat, Ambassador. I am transmitting because I need to understand something. Why are you doing this? Truly, humans gain nothing tangible from this undertaking. Your economy will be strained for decades, your resources diverted from your own development, your attention fixed on integration instead of expansion. Why?" Declan thought carefully about how to answer that question. "You remember what you said during the initial session? That these children carry genetic markers from extinct cultural lines? That they speak dead languages that no adult can teach them? Yes. To us, Chancellor, that is not a liability. That is a reason to protect them even harder, because if we do not preserve those cultural lines, those languages, those unique perspectives and ways of being, they are gone forever, lost to the universe, and the cosmos is measurably poorer for every extinction." "You are romanticizing." I am not, Declan interrupted. Every species that goes extinct takes irreplaceable knowledge with it, ways of thinking, ways of seeing reality, ways of solving problems that no one else would conceive. When you voted to euthanize these children, you were not just killing individuals. You were erasing the last living connections to 12 extinct civilizations. We are not willing to be complicit in that. There was a long silence on the channel. When Moradin spoke again, his voice had changed subtly. You will fail eventually. Statistically, it is inevitable. No system is perfect. No species maintains indefinite moral commitment. Maybe, Declan acknowledged, but we will fail trying, which is more than I can say for the rest of the galaxy. The transmission ended without further comment. 3 days later, the Unity convoy reached Earth orbit and the landing operations began. The landing was orchestrated chaos on a global scale, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. 100,000 children dispersed across 6 continents over 72 hours. The São Paulo Integration Center alone received 38,000 children. Every major city and 50 smaller population centers became home to beings who, 6 weeks ago, had been scheduled for execution. The media coverage was omnipresent and relentless. Galactic networks broadcasting footage of Lumineth children meeting their foster families for the first time, the light pulses of greeting bringing human families to tears. Catherine flying through real planetary atmosphere, their feathers displaying colors in Earth's sky that had never existed in nature before. Quellen discovering the Pacific Ocean and experiencing the reality of a truly vast body of water. Solverans basking in Icelandic geothermal heat, their silicon-based bodies finally comfortable for the first time since their worlds died. And Speaks, the tiny Euthari who had been the first to trust, giving an interview in halting but determined English that went viral across 17 species communication networks. Earth is far from dying. Humans keep promises even when hard. I was right to believe. You should believe, too. The first 48 hours planetside were the hardest. Children terrified by new environments, by gravity different from what they evolved for, by sounds and smells and sensations that had no reference in their short lives. Systems strained beyond their designed capacity. Cultural misunderstandings that ranged from amusing to deeply concerning. But then, slowly and carefully, things began to settle into rhythms that almost resembled stability. Lythan's foster parents, the geologists Yuki and David Tanaka, discovered that Lumineth young were naturally fascinated by crystal formation structures. They started taking Lythan on field trips to mineral deposits, teaching her to read Earth's geological history through the stones. Her light pulses grew more complex, more joyful, developing nuances that Lumineth linguists monitoring the integration said were unprecedented in their language structure. Neela, the Kethrin child with trauma-gray feathers, spent her first week on Earth in confused silence, her plumage refusing to shift from the color of grief. Then her foster mother, an ornithologist named Patricia Hayes, took her outside during sunset. Neela saw a real sky painted in colors that no hologram could replicate, and her plumage erupted in a cascade of brilliant hues she had not displayed in months. Patricia wept. Neela flew in circles, trailing color like a living rainbow. The Nomathi children, distributed among families with the highest empathy scores and given trained tactile companions, began the long process of rebuilding their telepathic network. They would never be what they were before. The adult minds were gone forever, that template lost. But the children were learning to connect to each other in new ways, and to the humans who cared for them through methods that transcended both telepathy and speech. Shard of Morning, the youngest fragment of Zathene collective consciousness, was housed with 17 other shards in a specially constructed facility in Brussels. Within 1 week, they had begun merging thoughts again with increasing sophistication. Within 2 weeks, they had created their first collaborative artwork, a crystalline sculpture that refracted light in patterns that made humans cry for reasons they could not articulate or explain. There were failures too, inevitable and heartbreaking. A Praxis child nearly destabilized in Denver before containment adaptations could be properly implemented on Earth's different electromagnetic background. A Corventhi child experienced severe psychological distress from herd separation, until emergency relocation to a facility with more of their species. Systems failed, protocols proved inadequate, emergency interventions became routine. But there were no deaths, not one, not in 30 days, not in 60, not crossing the threshold into the third month of Earth's great experiment. Chancellor Moradin arrived for his official inspection on day 30 after planetary landing. He toured the São Paulo Integration Center with his team of observers, noting every strained system, every improvised solution, every visible sign of chaos barely contained by human determination. "This is unsustainable," he said after watching a crew struggle to repair a Quelon tank during a child's scheduled feeding time. The work was frantic, improvised, held together with determination more than proper engineering. "You are running on fumes and hope and caffeine, Ambassador." "Yes," Declan agreed. He stood beside Moradin, both of them watching through observation glass. Declan looked profoundly exhausted, dark circles under his eyes that spoke to months of inadequate sleep. "And it is working. For now. What happens when your first major system failure occurs? When your first child dies despite all your efforts? Because it will happen, Ambassador. You cannot prevent every tragedy through sheer force of will. Then we will mourn, we will hold memorial services, we will grieve honestly and completely, and then we will improve our systems so it does not happen again. And we will keep going." Moradin watched a mixed group of children playing together under volunteer supervision, a sight that should have been impossible. A Euthari racing a Breckle through an obstacle course, a Lumineth teaching a Kethrin to pulse simple light patterns, the two species communicating across completely different sensory modalities. A human child showing a young Corventi how to draw pictures, both of them concentrating with intense seriousness. "You know what bothers me most about this entire situation?" Moradin said quietly. "It is working. Against all reasonable projection, against every logical model, you are actually making it work." "Is that what bothers you?" Declan asked. "Or is it that we are making it work without you? That we are proving the impossible was only impossible because no one tried hard enough?" The Chancellor's scales rippled through several colors before settling. "I voted for euthanization because I genuinely believed it was the only realistic option. Because sometimes mercy means accepting that you cannot save everyone, that some situations have no good solutions, only less terrible ones." "No," Declan said with absolute certainty. "Sometimes mercy means refusing to accept that calculus. Sometimes mercy is harder than death, because death is final, and mercy requires sustained effort. You chose the easy path and called it wisdom. And you think you can maintain this? This level of constant effort, this endless adaptation for the decades it will take these children to reach maturity?" Declan looked at the children playing, at Speaks, now serving as an unofficial translator between species, at Lithan, showing another child her collection of Earth rocks, at 100,000 reasons humanity had committed to the impossible. "Ask me in 5 years," he said. 5 years later, the transmission arrived at 3 a.m. Brussels time. Declan Rourke, now 63 and officially retired but serving as special consultant to the Integration Authority, was pulled from sleep by his secure channel alert. The specific tone meant assembly priority message, the kind that could not wait for morning. The message originated from the outer fringe, the same region where the silence plague had first appeared 5 years ago. New plague detected. Different strain, different mechanism, but same horrifying selectivity. This time, it killed adolescents while sparing adults and young children. The death toll had reached 14 million and was climbing exponentially. Projected orphans from this outbreak, 2.1 million children across 19 different species. The Galactic Assembly was formally requesting Earth's consultation on humanitarian crisis response protocols. Declan sat in his small apartment, staring at the data spillover across his holographic displays. 2 million children, 12 of the original species plus 7 new ones. Resource requirements that would make the first undertaking look simple by comparison. Impossible. Completely, utterly, laughably impossible. His secure channel chimed again. Minister Ekene Adeyemi, also retired, but still kept in the loop on major assembly communications. "You're seeing this?" Ekene asked without preamble. "Yes." What are you thinking? Declan pulled up statistics from the first undertaking, the summary reports he reviewed monthly. In 5 years, they had achieved a 98% survival rate across all original orphans. Lythan was now 14 human years equivalent, studying xenogeology at university alongside her foster parents. Speaks had become a professional translator for the Integration Authority, helping new refugees learn human languages. The Nomathi children had rebuilt their telepathic network into something unprecedented, a hybrid consciousness that incorporated both telepathic and non-telepathic communication methods. Neela flew with a mixed-species aerial performance troupe, her plumage displaying colors that Catherine artists said were entirely new to their aesthetic tradition. Shard of Morning's collective had merged into a healthy Zathene consciousness that published poetry in 3 languages and had just won a major literary award. They had done the impossible once, successfully. The question was whether they should attempt it again, whether they could attempt it again. Declan? Akane prompted. He thought about the Assembly's carefully worded consultation request, the diplomatic phrasing that was really asking, "Will you save them again?" He thought about Chancellor Moradin's words 5 years ago. "You will fail eventually." He thought about 2.1 million children who would die if someone did not act. His fingers hovered over the response interface. Declan, you do not have to answer this. You have done enough, more than enough. You have nothing to prove to anyone. It is not about proving anything, Declan said quietly. He opened a channel to the Galactic Assembly, knowing that in 6 hours the media would explode across human space and beyond, that 892,000 families would become millions, that the Integration Authority would need to expand exponentially again, that every system Earth had built and tested would strain to breaking and beyond, that it was impossible, that they would do it anyway, because that was what family meant. You showed up. You did the work. You carried the weight even when it broke you. The transmission cued. Declan stared at it for a long moment, then looked at the photograph on his desk. Speaks and Lythan and Neela and a dozen other children from that first desperate convoy, all smiling at a camera on their first Earth Day 5 years ago. All alive, all thriving, all proof that impossible was just another word for difficult. He pressed send before he could reconsider. The message was simple, just 5 words that would reshape galactic civilization again. We will take them all. The screen faded to black before the response could arrive, leaving only Declan's reflection staring back at him from the darkened display.